You're in the 06010. Focus. Fantasy Focus.
Hello and welcome to Fantasy Focus Football, presented by Boost Mobile, alongside my two best friends, Field Yates and Stephania Bell. My name is Daniel Dopp here, and ready for a Week 10 recap. I was up until 2 a.m. I don't know about you guys, but I could not go to bed after last night's Sunday Night Football game. It was too much for me. I mean, 5 interceptions from Jared Goff, and yet my Lions still grind out a victory. I mean, it was great. Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
You were never out, though.
You were never.
You're right.
First of
I was
all,
never out.
You
You're
were
right.
never out. They kicked their way to victory.
I loved it.
And it was glorious.
It was glorious. It was glorious. I actually feel really bad. I have underneath this, I have a salute to service Detroit Lions sweater on that Mama Dopp got me for my birthday. She was very adamant, like, please open it early. Please open it early. Have you opened it yet? Have you seen it yet? Did you open it yet? And so I finally have it on. Mama Dopp, thank you so much. I appreciate it. But underneath this, I have my Jake Bates jersey because I just felt like I needed to double up and give the man some love for being able to will us to victory with a couple of late kicks. Shout out to Jake Bates.
I was working on my Dan Campbell impersonation, calling out Jake Bates earlier this morning. I don't know if you guys want it right now. It's a little loud, but if
I think I want it, Field. I think I do.
I think Daniel gets to make that call.
Yeah.
You ready?
Yep.
You're ready.
I got the mic a little bit removed.
A little farther away. Yeah.
Bates! Hey, Bates, where's freaking Bates, man? This freaking guy, every time I need a freaking kick, he just digs one out, 58 yards, Bates! I'm spitting a lot right now.
Yeah,
You are spitting a
I love the
lot.
way you're trying to make it look like you've got a little bit of dip in the front of your mouth, too. That's what you
Bates, man!
So
Tell you what,
good.
guys, I freaking love this team, man. That's how you play good football. All three phases, man. It's the sign of a good team, man.
I can't tell if you are Dan Campbell or Macho Man Randy Savage talking about Jake Bates. It's a little bit of both, right?
But he is kind of like Macho Man.
But he is kind of like
He
it.
is.
Yeah, right.
He is.
That
I was
fits.
working on that
That
one this
totally
morning.
fits.
The
Oh,
awesome
it's
hype
good.
man. Yeah.
Add
Hey,
that
listen-
to the repertoire. We're going to keep that going.
yeah. You've been doing really good with impressions.
He
so
has.
far.
I actually, we were on the text thread last night, and I was like, I sent you a locker room clip that we hope will make an appearance later in the show.
Yeah, man, it's been a good run so far. We'll see what we get a little bit later on. Maybe we get some extra ones here in the show. It is Monday, which means obviously we have a full recap going through our big takeaways from the week. We got our Week 10 studs, our Week 10 duds, and we'll see what else we have time to find to dive into. It was kind of, honestly, a crappy week for fantasy football. It was not fantastic because it felt like there was a lot of lower scoring games, which for fantasy football made it a little bit less fun. But it's not just fantasy football that we're going to talk about here today because, Stephania, I want to say to you, Happy Veterans Day. As the daughter of a veteran, I understand, and more than most people do, the idea that service members' families go through just as much as service members themselves, and there is a lot that is a part of being able to be a part of someone that is a veteran. And so I just want to say thank you for that. And,
Well, thank you. Coming from you,
veterans.
we did talk about this yesterday when we signed off the show. My father was an Air Force veteran. Most people know my father passed away this year. So, you know, it's tough Remembrance Day for us, but we're so proud of his service, and it really shaped all the choices that he made afterwards, including living out in California. My father served in the Korean War, and just very, very proud of his service, and really was recognized for that much later in life. And I would say to people out there, you know, when you do approach someone and say thank you for your service, it means the world to these veterans. Just a few small words, it really does. My father was very touched by people who would come up and thank him. And so, Daniel, I say to you, thank you for your service.
absolutely.
That's right, everybody. I mean, Daniel, Papa Bell, great Americans, just great Americans right there. You can see this wonderful photo of Daniel, which that is actually Daniel Dopp, people. I
It
promise.
is. It is.
It's a young Daniel
It is a
Dopp.
young Daniel Dopp. You still have a great youthful exuberance about you, but you have a beard now, and
I
you
do.
have long, long hair. So
Yes.
it really is. It is stark. It's alarming how much you and T.J. Hawkinson have followed the same path.
That's right.
Of like your drip has dramatically increased over the years, but we know how much your time in the service impacted the person you are today. We are eternally grateful for you, the great Daniel Dopp. And you guys all know him as, you know, kind of the backbone of this show here that we do. But we are so grateful to know Daniel Dopp, the veteran who pledged significant amount of time in his life to our country and I know how much that time meant to you, and you are always proud to be called a veteran and also to recognize fellow veterans on this very, very special and important day, which probably is inadequate to recognize the efforts of all those that have or will serve in our country.
And for the record, for some of our newer audience, they may not know where the origin of Secret Squirrel came from when they heard the theme music. Would you care to share?
Yeah, so when I was in the Air Force, I was an intelligence analyst. I worked for the NSA the entire
It's
time.
like basically being a fantasy football.
It's very similar to that kind of a thing. You know, we just do different kinds of analysis, but it's that same kind of thing. And so when you work in that career field, your nickname is a secret squirrel.
Got it.
And so that's where it came from as a part of that. I wrote down a handful of things, if you guys don't mind me sharing them.
Go for it.
Floor is yours.
I'll try really hard to get through it without being emotional. But being a veteran is very important to me. Veterans Day will for always and forever be a reminder of the pride that I have in this country and our nation and the freedoms that come along with that. And the United States is one of those countries that I feel like is different than so many other places because of the fact that the freedoms that we have extends to everybody, all the citizens that are inside of this country, those freedoms to be who you want to be, to love who you want to love, the pursuit of your happiness, to find that American dream. And I don't think that those should just belong to people that look like me. They should be for everybody in this country, regardless if you are a man or a woman or you're transgender or non-binary, if you are white or black or you are Asian or Hispanic or Middle Eastern. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. If you are straight or gay, or if you are a Christian, or you are Jewish, or you are Catholic, or you don't have a religion that you subscribe to, or if you are a Republican or a Democrat, or you don't have a political affiliation, at the end of the day, what matters most is that you are a human being. And being in this country and being able to fight for the freedoms of you as a human, to be the person that you want to be, was something that every time Veterans Day comes around, it's always just like hits me extra hard. I know that I have been at the top of the privilege food chain being a straight white male in our country, but those privileges should not just be for people like me. They should be for everybody, period, across the board. To me, I feel like that's what being a patriot is when I think about being a veteran, is being able to stand up for freedoms for everybody, not just people that look like me. And so I am choosing love and hope and seeing every day as a chance to be better and to do better for our country. And I hope that if you are watching this or you are listening to this, that you will meet me there in loving other people, in learning from your mistakes, and helping to make this country be a better place every single day. I think those are the true patriots of our country, people that want to embrace those values and help uplift everybody inside of our nation. And so I'm so proud to be able to have been a veteran and to have stood up for those freedoms and privileges for everyone, capital E, everyone in our country. So that is what being a veteran means to me. And today is always that eternal reminder of the sacrifices that so many people have made for our country so that we can be the people that we want to be, and that I can talk about football on this stupid fake football show alongside you two beautiful people. So there is no good pivot from that.
Well said.
But that is what being a veteran is for me. And so with that, I have an enormous amount of pride, not just in our nation, but in my Detroit Lions. I got to take this shirt off just so I can have my Jake Bates shirt, if you don't mind.
Go right ahead.
Man, I was thinking about a pivot there.
I know.
Yeah, Chuba Hubbard had some air yards yesterday. How's that for a pivot? I don't know. I don't actually know if he had air yards.
Shout out to Jake Bates, who, for what it's worth, right? The whole point is he had a dream. And he never gave up on that dream to be able to become the person that he wanted to be. Shout out to him, from going to being a bricklayer to being in the UFL, kicking for the Michigan Panthers, and finding his way onto the Detroit Lions, where he just willed his team to an 8-1 record. Shout out to a guy like that.
Wasn't he working as a bricklayer in Houston?
Yes.
Didn't he come
That's his
home?
hometown.
It was like the full circle moment for him was like something out of a Disney movie, right?
Yeah.
It was just fantastic. And so what a great night for him, and to see him elevated on the shoulders of his teammates and carried off the field and got the post-game interview, no less. I mean, really, Jared Goff naturally ceded that platform yesterday, but
He had 5
what a-
reasons.
Yes, he did.
what a great night for Jake Bates. And,
Freaking Bates, man.
by the way, I just will say off of that, for all of you who don't believe the kicking game matters, I'm sorry. But if you watched yesterday, it sure does.
Oh, man.
In the positive and in the negative, it sure does. And so shout out to Jake Bates for ending the Sunday on a positive note
Exactly.
for all the kickers
Oh,
in the NFL.
We needed it. We needed it. All right, let's dive into our Week 10 takeaways. Field, I'm going to start with you. Your biggest takeaway from Week 10 is...
This all feels pretty inadequate right now and like not that impactful. That being said, guys, I'm a little bit afraid that we have found the Malik Neighbors that we thought we were getting coming into the season. And that is not to say that Malik Neighbors is not an incredible talent. I think anybody who has watched the Giants this year recognizes that they have a lot of things not going in their favor right now, but they have a potential dynamic number one wide receiver for the next 7 or 8 years, as long as they manage things properly there. And he's an absolute star football player. But what were the concerns for Malik Neighbors coming into the season, if there were some? The concerns were, hey, this guy should see a lot of volume, but is this quarterback any good? And is this team actually going to get into scoring position enough for him to reach that upside that other wide receivers brought to the table because of their circumstances? How about this? Over the last 4 games, Malik Neighbors ranked 2nd in the NFL in target share. That's a great number, right? You want a guy to see a lot of targets.
Ton of volume.
In that same 4-game stretch, he is 57th in catch percentage. Catch percentage is often a reflection of quarterback play, right? So bad quarterback play. I don't need to tell you guys that Daniel Jones is very much a below-average quarterback. We saw that yesterday morning, I should say. As far as the opportunities for scoring, right? He has 1 end zone target in the last 4 games. They just aren't visiting the end zone all that often. The Giants are just a bad offense. That isn't going to happen. As a result, Malik Neighbors' best finish over the last 4 games, and it wasn't yesterday morning, is wide receiver 22. I'm not saying that Malik Neighbors is going to be benched anytime soon from your fantasy lineup, but there was a time where you were seeing Malik Neighbors consistently ranked as like somewhere between wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 5. I would say, coming out of the Giants' bye, that Malik Neighbors is much more likely to rank around wide receiver 15, even with this ginormous target share, than he is wide receiver 5 for me.
Not all targets are created equal.
They just aren't.
Yeah. It kind of feels like, and I don't want to, this
Nothing to
isn't
do with him.
meant to be a slander, but it's like it feels like this is going to be more of like a Jarvis Landry type season where he may just get a ton of targets, but you're not getting in the end zone, right? Jarvis Landry notoriously got a ton of targets, a bunch of volume, but it felt like he never found the end zone.
And by the way, 2 things to add to that are to sort of illustrate that point. 5 straight games. So I talked about 4 games. 5 straight games with 0 touchdowns from Malik Neighbors. On top of that, he's averaging 10.7 yards per catch. Not terrible, right? But like, this was a guy who last season was amongst the best players in all of college football down the field. Explosive plays.
Yep.
Not happening right now for the Giants offense as teams have just bottled them up. They have said, if we're going to lose to you, it's going to be because Daniel Jones is going to pick us apart. We don't believe he can, and he has shown he cannot.
Yeah. We are not out on Malik Neighbors, but we are
just-
recalibrating expectations.
He is who we
moving forward.
thought he was, right?
Exactly.
And so it's not like I'm obviously thrilled about the promise of the player going forward, but for now, like you thought you may have drafted like a nuclear wide receiver option, you did for the first like 3 or 4 games, but since then it has been
Everybody
a
figured it
much
out, right?
it's been a much different tale because of Daniel Jones' significant struggles.
100%. All right, Stephania, I don't want to say that was negative, but maybe you have something a little more.
That was pretty negative.
The whole week kind of felt that way. We'll get into it in a little bit. But, Stephania, do you have anything more positive for us for a Week 10 takeaway?
I'm going to shock everyone. I'm going to talk about a
Jake Bates.
49er.
That's amazing.
I'm going to shock you.
Jake Moody?
No. Although, thank goodness it ended the way it did.
Yes,
Oh my God,
right?
he could have been on.
Let's
waivers
talk
tonight.
about the return of the long-awaited for fantasy managers who were deprived of their number 1 overall draft pick around the world. Christian McCaffrey makes his season debut in Week 10, and it was an impressive debut. Now, he didn't get in the end zone, but 13 carries for 39 yards, another 6 catches for 68 yards. Right now, with 16.7 fantasy points, he stands at 10th amongst running backs. But remember, we didn't know how much he was going to play in this first game, and we didn't know exactly how he was going to look. He was on the field a lot, played 54 out of 61 snaps. That's over 88%. Kyle Shanahan was talking about Christian McCaffrey's involvement afterwards when he was speaking with reporters, and he said, really, because they didn't do much offensively in the third quarter, he actually had kind of a natural break there. And he was like, in the fourth quarter, we needed him. He wasn't coming off the field.
Yeah.
So they fell into what we thought they would, which is when they really feel like they need Christian McCaffrey out there to change the offense, they have him. Our old friend Tim Hasselbeck, former Fantasy Football Now, was on Scott Van Pelt's show last night, and he said one of the things about McCaffrey being back, he's just the biggest matchup problem that a running back presents because visibility, both catching the ball, running with the ball, and just nobody knows exactly where he's going to be. And you could see that. He has to be accounted for. It changes the looks that the 49ers get, and it opens up the offense for them. So for fantasy purposes, I think if you were hesitant to deploy him this week, you can feel much, much better based on how he looked and the volume of work that he got. And there is no doubt that that's going to be all his going forward. By the way, Jordan Mason, 1 carry. Isaac Rendo, 1 carry.
Yep.
So, the running back carries with
Kyle can't help
Christian
himself.
McCaffrey.
He can say whatever he wants during the week. Got to be smart. Got to be careful.
But it worked out. It worked out.
Of course,
it worked out.
But I have known this about Kyle for years now. He can't help himself. This is a good thing for our purposes. He had 6 catches and 68 yards yesterday, Christian McCaffrey. Jordan Mason for the entire season has 9 catches and 86 yards. So it's a total game changer. Lock him in. Top 5 running back every single week. Christian McCaffrey.
And he had that one pass. I didn't write. I think it was like 30-something yards. Where
Nice little wheel route.
And
Brock Purdy just put it
Brock
up to
Purdy's sort of the lollipop ball there. Yep.
Yeah, love that.
How about you, Daniel?
All right, my big takeaway is how about my doppelganger, TJ Hawkinson?
Yeah, baby.
If you've been waiting to have this guy back in the tight end position, congratulations. He looks like he is fully back. 9 targets, 8 receptions, 72 yards for 15.2 fantasy points, more receptions and receiving yards than anyone else on this Vikings squad, including Justin Jefferson. A reminder, and I said it a bunch coming into the week, this dude is a monster when it comes to fantasy football. 12 of his 14 games this year. I appreciate it. 12 of 14 games last year. He had double-digit fantasy points, did it again this week. And by the way, he did that on just 38 snaps. Justin Jefferson played 76 snaps. So you knew it was not even a full workload for TJ Hawkinson.
It's still about a 50% play time for him. I guess that would be exactly 50% yesterday because Josh Oliver is giving them legitimate snaps right now, and they're still relying on Johnny Munt a little bit. So if he can be this efficient, one thing is clear. When TJ is on the field, it's more than likely going to be in a passing situation. So while we'd like to see that number grow from 50 to maybe 65 or 70, for now the good news is those are 50 pretty efficient % of the snaps, given how much they're going to throw the football when he is on the field. Also, Sam Darnold, dud of all duds yesterday. This could have been a better day for everybody on this offense, but the Jaguars defense really came to play.
Yeah.
I will say this, TJ Hawkinson took a shot yesterday, and I don't know if you saw it, Tanya. And he came off and he comes over to the side and, immediately checking in with their head of performance and looking at them. And so you can, to me, I look for those things because I'm watching the conversation. I'm watching the dialogue when they're checking how he's doing. And then, that was not an issue. So sometimes it's good. They take those hits, they get back up. Maybe there's a little scare there, but then they get through it. That's all part of coming back from this injury.
Yep, that return to performance, that return to play, everything about. I can imagine when you're in practice and you're still donning that red practice jersey, where it's like you're not allowed to be able to hit people.
Even if they did, nobody's hitting you
in
like
the same way,
opponent, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So until they get in the game, they really don't get to experience that, and it's a part that's often overlooked when players are coming back from these big injuries.
Yep. All right, when we come back, we're going to dive into our Week 10 studs of the week. We'll see you guys in just a moment.
Happy Veterans Day. Thanks to all the veterans and troops out there who go overseas and protect our right to play football and protect the freedoms of everybody.
Committed to Veterans Day with a fantasy performance like none other.
Oh my
right?
God.
He's
He was
atop
awesome.
the leaderboard right now
Yes.
as far as quarterbacks.
And
So.
I'd imagine he'll
Thank you,
stay
Joe
there.
Burrow.
With the quarterbacks in play left tonight. Big time. Big time.
Tell you what,
performance on
though,
Thursday night. Yeah.
speaking of some quarterbacks that have had some big-time play, Field Yates, you and I were texting back and forth yesterday for just a little bit, and what Jalen Hurts feels like he has done since the bye. I mean, last 3 weeks specifically, but since his bye has been unbelievable. Maybe a top 3 quarterback, it feels like the rest of the way.
Yeah, over the past 3 weeks, his worst performance was yesterday, in which he had a mere 29.68 fantasy points. And it's everything right now for Jalen Hurts. It's both facets of his game that is clicking, with one in particular that we know makes him such an unusual fantasy football quarterback. So yesterday he throws for 202 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not a monster day through the air, but over the past 4 games, Jalen Hurts has 8 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah.
Guys, he is the best bet to find the end zone as a runner in the entire NFL. And so I did notice yesterday that some people on the internet were disappointed that he's continuing to take away some of the opportunities from Saquon Barkley. We'll have that conversation at a different time.
I'm one of them.
But for now, I mean, Saquon's been so good this year that it's not like Saquon's had a total dud season by any stretch because of Jalen Hurts' rise. But right now, if you were to say going up against the following quarterback is the scariest sight in fantasy football, I think there's 2 quarterbacks that are a cut above the rest at this moment. I do believe it's Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson. So once again, Jalen Hurts balls out his 3rd straight 29-plus point effort. A ridiculous tear that he is on right now, and they are playing with a ton of confidence. No reason for me to believe this is going to slow down anytime soon.
Right. We talked about Joe Burrow's performance this week. Lamar Jackson right behind him. And then number 3 is Jalen Hurts. And by the way, he only played part of that game.
Yeah, he taken out in the 4th quarter.
He ends up coming out in the
We got
fourth
Kenny Pickett action, is that right?
Yeah, it ends up coming out in the 4th quarter. So just think the fantasy production could have been even greater if you were to, extrapolate that out through 4 quarters. I think the most impressive thing is how he's running the ball. 17.6 of those fantasy points came through his efforts on the ground. You're right, Daniel. I got a teeny bit concerned, but I'll tell you what. I wondered if in the back of his mind, Jalen Hurts is like, I'm going to show you about my ankle.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you about my ankles are fine.
Yeah.
I'll tell
Sure
you
looked
what.
fine yesterday. Yeah.
You said 8 rushing touchdowns in the last 4 games. Saquon has 8 rushing touchdowns the entire season.
Which, by the way, that's a great number.
I know, but
for
Field,
9 games.
fantasy managers aren't realistic like that.
I know, but it's like, wow, like Saquon's on pace for almost 18 touchdowns this year, 17 touchdowns this season, whatever the number is when you combine rushing and receiving touchdowns. And it's like, hold on now, like 2 things can be true at once. Saquon's a mammoth, and so is Jalen Hurts for fantasy purposes. And Daniel, the yo-yo that is Kyler Murray,
Oh my gosh,
continues yesterday.
3 of his last 4 games, he has had over 20 fantasy points. So you love to see that, right? But it does feel like this team has been all over the place. And he got here in part because he got 2 rushing touchdowns himself.
Okay, those count, right?
3 carries for 21 yards and 2 touchdowns. He scampered all over the place, looked fantastic on those runs. By the way, he did his best, not yesterday, Jared Goff performance, but his best previous Jared Goff performance.
Yeah.
22 for 24.
Almost a 92% completion rate.
That was
It's
unreal.
insane.
And he got Marvin Harrison Jr. involved. He had 5 for 54 and a touchdown, which we love to see. Trey McBride had 4 for 71. So not only did Kyler have a great day, felt like this was the Kyler, and I don't expect him to be this efficient all the time, right? I don't expect him to find the end zone like this. But he just looked like the Kyler Murray. When I drafted him in fantasy football, this was the quarterback I thought I was going to have on my squad.
You know how they always say the best cure for, the disgruntled locker room is winning? I think the best cure for that relationship between Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. was seeing what we saw yesterday. Because when they're in sync and
Yeah.
it works, don't you think that just, like, we want more of that? They're going to want to do more of that. I just feel like that was a turning point yesterday.
By the way, they've won 4 straight games. You mentioned like the best
place Cardinals, yeah.
Oh,
That's a
I'm
big
well
part of
aware.
it. Oh, sorry, Stephania.
Yeah, thank
You're right. You're right. That's on me. That's my bad. No, but he was fantastic against the Jets. We'll talk about the Jets a little bit later on in this show because
Yeah.
that's been a thing.
But let's keep the good times rolling
Yes.
right now.
Dude.
Right? Like, we talked about this recently. We gave out the fantasy football MVP. I don't know, or maybe it was the breakout, whatever category Saquon fell into. Bijan's like starting to enter that conversation. Bijan Robinson is, because he now has 5 straight games in PPR scoring with 21 or more fantasy points.
Yep.
And yesterday, he had a career high 29.4 fantasy points with 20 carries for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns, plus 3 catches for 28 yards. Bijan was awesome. This Falcons offense obviously came up short, and they really took a long time to get going. Bijan has just been incredible. We kind of prayed for this all last year, hoping that those nightmares of 2023 would end up being a thing of the past. They are a thing of the past and more. This offense runs through Bijan and Drake London too, who playing through a hip injury yesterday, had another massive day because he's a beast. But Bijan, just a delightful sight to see. And I know that we always say, like, we don't care how you get the fantasy points. I would just say this. while we don't care how you get the fantasy points as long as you get them, this guy is so fun to watch. He is just a remarkably talented football player. Remarkably talented.
I think to that end, it's the way he runs. Like, treat yourself to a recap of this game because he has this beautiful 37-yard touchdown run, but he also gets the goal line score. I know.
You guys see this?
Yes, we were looking at each other yesterday watching this going, how many tries before
Tyler
we put
Algier,
Bijan in?
Literally, so they had a situation where they had 1st and goal from the 1-yard line. And in the NFL, for those that don't know this, if the offense takes a player off the field and subs personnel, the defense has the right to match. And so the ref will hold his hand on the ball
over top of it.
until
Yeah.
the defense has substituted its personnel in. So sometimes when you get a big play down the field and you don't want the defense to get its goal line personnel in, you just keep the same guys on the field. So Tyler Algier was already on the field, so they said keep him on, and they ran 3 straight plays from the 1, and they gained half a yard.
Not
And
ideal.
Bijan came in, and it was like, oh, he just walked right in the end.
Dude, it was great, right? It was like Tyler Algier. All right, this isn't working. Let's put in, Bijan Robinson and Bob's your uncle, and then he gets a touchdown.
Yeah.
Which was-
I just don't think this is. I think sometimes we've seen this, and this extends beyond multiple regimes, is that I think that Bijan and Tyler Algier is treated too much like David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs at the goal line. Like, Monty is a 240-pound hammerhead, right? Like, that guy is a known finisher. I just don't know that Tyler Algier is anywhere near that category of player as David Montgomery, and as a result, Bijan should be treated much more like his equal as opposed to like the secondary option on goal line or short yardage opportunities.
By the way, if we could have Bijan Robinson play the New Orleans Saints every single game, his 3 best games of his career, 29.4 fantasy points, which is what he just did, and then back in 2023, 27.3 fantasy points for one of the games, 26.1 fantasy points for the other game. 3 best games of his career have come against these New Orleans Saints. So, and over that 5-game stretch, Field, that you said he has at least 21.5 fantasy points in every single game. He's running back 1. I mean, obviously, like he's just been ununbelievable over this last.
For a
couple
half
games.
of the season, he has been the best running back in football. I said he was on the periphery of the MVP conversation. He's more like centrally located in that MVP conversation.
I agree
If he
with
keeps
that.
this up, obviously Bijan would be very much in the mix for year-end MVP.
If we're being greedy, because we play
'Cause we
fantasy
do that.
football, and we are, I would just like to see a few more passes thrown his way because I think he can be helpful when Kirk Cousins is struggling. To find, there were times where things were falling apart. You can find that outlet in Bijan Robinson. He can turn nothing into something. So 4 targets yesterday, caught 3 of them. Maybe bump that up to 5 or 6.
We're picking nits, but I'm with you on Stephania. I'm with you on that. All right, speaking of some good running backs. Yeah, yesterday while we were doing Fantasy Football Now,
The only word I know.
dude, did you see Sean
John
Hockley?
Hockley, I know that's what you're talking about.
Sean Hockley, when he
You
went
not
in,
see this?
No, I mean, we're doing a
he
show.
called a penalty, and he did the first half of the penalty where he called it all in German.
All in German.
What a stud.
It was, and like the crowd, you could like
And it
hear
was
like a
like-
murmur in the crowd of like,
It was like,
this
was
is
it like
doing
a
this.
false start or offsides? But I mean, it was something not a normal word. Like that was studied.
Yeah.
Because he had to know. Wasn't that the first one that he? Well, I don't remember when it was in the game.
It was
so I
great.
can't say that. But I thought it was pretty early. So I didn't know if he had to learn multiple penalties in German to
Just
be
to be
able
safe?
to be
Yeah.
exactly.
Usually
or
we
did
see-
he just pull that out.
We often see a Hockley flexing out there on the football
love
field.
it,
This
yeah.
time we got it in a slightly
Got the
different way.
intellectual flex.
Yeah.
We only talk about refs when they do something dumb, and that's going to continue to happen. It's the way that fans work in sports. But the Hockeys are national treasures.
I
The
agree.
fans went nuts, by the way, too, in
I agree.
Germany.
Pipes
The
Hockey,
Munich
like-
fans were so excited.
I wonder
when
how
they
old
got that.
Sean. I'm assuming. I don't know if Sean has a family or not, but if he does, I'm assuming that family, boys,
using
girls,
refs?
one day will end up becoming refs in whatever sport that they are most passionate about. But anyways, yeah,
Anyway,
Chuba Hubbard was awesome.
yes.
Again,
Dude.
paid this week, Stephania, and then just like, actually, I'm going to prove that you guys just got a deal.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it couldn't happen to a nicer young man. He was so happy and just so blessed about his deal. Just couldn't stop expressing his thanks over it. But look, we thought they might not play Jonathan Brooks, and that's exactly what happened. They had to activate him to the roster because of the timing of the window, but they did not put him on the field. So, again, they've talked about him watching and learning. I do think that he will take the field soon, potentially as soon as week 11. Miles Sanders did suffer an injury, was carted off the field in this game. only had 2 carries for 5 yards. Not that he's been a real threat to the Chuba Hubbard work, but he just was also not available.
Only thing I'll say, week 12 because they're on a bye this week, so they get the
yes,
bonus
week
week
12.
for Jonathan Brooks.
Right.
But I think, truthfully, like for fantasy purposes, he is an insurance policy at best right
Yes.
now. I think he is droppable if you absolutely need the spot. Is Jonathan Brooks, because why would they go away from the thing that is working so brilliantly? Is after signing this contract extension, he has a career high 153 rushing yards and a touchdown, plus 4 catches for 16 yards. One of the top scoring running backs. As a matter of fact, RB2 for the week right now. Daniel, he was awesome again.
He was unbelievable, and I want to say this. I think when I think about Chuba Hubbard, and you mentioned the idea of, like, do you keep Jonathan Brooks, do you drop Jonathan Brooks? If I'm going to start Jonathan Brooks, it's either going to be at the tail end of my season when I'm potentially fighting to make a playoff spot, or I'm starting him in the fantasy playoffs, and I'm not sure that I have the confidence in a guy to
insurance
be able
only.
to do that.
He's
Exactly.
Trey Benson, he's Blake Corum.
He's
now.
Trey Benson without having played football so far. This
But
season, right?
but same idea that this guy is his value is strictly dependent upon the guy in front of him not being available.
Yep. But Chuba Hubbard has been fantastic. Back-to-back 20-point fantasy days. He has 4 of those days so far this season.
Yeah.
And you love to be able to see him just be able to crush it on a national stage. In spite of the fact that the national stage was at 9:30 a.m., not everyone gets to watch those games
Everybody
like
was
we
watching
do.
fantasy football now.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. But he was absolutely awesome. Chuba Hubbard is just so good. Another guy that's been super good this year. Dude.
Late.
Of late, I should say that. Cortland Sutton, first 7 weeks of the season. 60.7 fantasy points, averaged 8.7 fantasy points per game last 3 weeks of the season. Last 3 weeks compared to the first 7, 59.4 fantasy points, averaging 19.8 fantasy points per game. The dude has been unreal, at least 17.1 fantasy points each the last 3 weeks, and it feels like this coincides with him and Bo Nix having just a little bit more chemistry with each other. This was a tough matchup going against the Kansas City Chiefs.
And by the way, that was a beautiful touchdown to Cortland Sutton.
Yes.
Like, that's a great route. It's a great throw. That's a great finish right there. So he has clearly emerged in an offense that, despite the fact that they are a good defense, it feels like Bo's passing volume is still good enough every single week.
Yep.
The number one target in this offense should see somewhere between 7 and 8 targets, maybe even 10 a game, and he has delivered in a major, major way. He is a very, very good vertical threat. Good to see Bo growing more confident throwing the football down the field.
I mean, speaking of confidence, I didn't feel like he was fazed at all by playing against the Chiefs in Arrowhead. And so to me, that if he maintains that measured progression and he's unlocked this rapport with Cortland Sutton, I think this speaks volumes for now. I look at Cortland Sutton like, oh, I might want to try and acquire him for some of these other duds on my roster these next few weeks.
Yeah, he's been great over the last 3 weeks. Absolutely unbelievable. I do just want to say, on behalf of Broncos fans, I was bummed. I thought they had this one. I mean, this was one of those
well did.
finishes that,
Well
like,
did, yeah.
you don't expect there to be a blocked field goal as time expires when it felt like you were in a good spot. I thought the Broncos were going to steal one from Kansas City in Kansas City.
Yeah.
It was a tough one for Broncos fans. Another thing that was tough, though, for Broncos fans was watching a guy named Travis Kelce run all over the field.
He did what Travis Kelce
ridiculous.
is known to do. 20.4 fantasy points, gets in the end zone. We have not seen as much of that this year.
The second one of the season, yeah.
Targets. Finally, Patrick Mahomes going back to Old Faithful and Travis Kelce. Guess who sits atop the leaderboard for tight ends in Week 10?
Probably Travis Kelce.
Travis Kelce.
Yeah, he did start slow, right? He started the season slow in part because of Rashee Rice being there, but he's now, with Rashee Rice no longer being there, he is fully back to being Patrick Mahomes' safety blanket, leads all tight ends in targets and receptions. And Field, you kind of mentioned it, I think, a little earlier, I think it was last week, when you look at his air yards. I mean, he's not getting targeted down the field. He is definitely more of a safety blanket, a safety valve than anything else. But if you're going to get 12 targets from Patrick freaking Mahomes, that's going to work for us.
Yeah, his yards per catch for the season went down yesterday, and it was already at a career low, 8.8, by like a lot. So he only averaged 8 yards a catch yesterday, so that number will obviously go down from 8.8 to maybe like 8.78, but it doesn't matter. The volume is so ridiculous. The Chiefs absolutely need him. They play the Buffalo Bills this upcoming weekend. I don't expect too many Chiefs games to become shootouts because the defense is so good, but if any team can move the football decently against Kansas City, Buffalo is probably amongst those teams. So a big day coming up for Travis Kelce pretty much every Sunday going forward because they absolutely must have him. He has
Need him, yeah.
emerged right back to where he often has been for many, many years. He is right now, if he's not tight end 1 every single week, he's battling it out with George Kittle as tight end 1 every single week.
You want to know something funny? Tight end performances this week. Number 1, Travis Kelce. Number 2, Mark Andrews. And number 4, Sam Laporta. It's
Love
like
it.
they all were revived.
Love it.
Kittle in that. Is Kittle in that mix?
Kittle is 6 right
Okay,
now
so-
because TJ Hawkinson's 5.
So we basically had a chalky week.
Yeah.
Was there some
Tanner
random?
Hudson.
Chalky week based on
Tanner
preseason
Hudson,
expectations.
Yeah, because
Tanner Hudson is the
Of course, of course. If you looked at the top 10 of
Trey
wide
McBride
receivers
comes
this
in
year.
just below George Kittle. So it's
right.
really kind of like
Right,
how we
that's not
structured
bad.
this
Yeah.
season.
we're looking for. Yeah.
Top 10 of wide receivers here. Just go ahead and check them out here in week 10 because the top 10 wide receivers, there's at least 5 guys that you did not expect to be inside the top 10.
I
I
hadn't even
promise you
heard of
that.
5 of those
Kidding.
guys. Yeah.
All right, when we come back, we're going to dive into a couple of quick shout outs here from week 10. We'll see you in just a moment.
Thank you to all the great veterans that have served and fought for this country, for our freedom. I'm very thankful for what all you've done for this country, and this country wouldn't be where it is without you. Thank you so much for your hard work.
Felt like Derrick Henry was speaking to me because I said he was going to have 20 rushing touchdowns. So
Yeah.
I
far
think
this
he
year.
was. I think
Felt-
he was.
felt the connection.
Balling out for
Yeah.
Shout out
he
to
really
Derrick Henry
is.
as well. Hey, let's give a couple of quick shout outs. Field, speaking of some running backs.
Bucks running backs just been flashing. If you're wondering, do I start Bucky Irving or Rashad White? The answer is yes. Just start
Yes.
both. These
Yes.
guys have been unbelievable in the passing game. As Rashad White has 6 catches for 39 yards and a touchdown yesterday. He's RB5 right now on the week with 19 fantasy points. Bucky Irving was also great. He was the more efficient and effective runner. 13 carries for 73 yards, plus 3 catches for 14 yards. Not a mammoth day through the air, but good enough to get him to RB7 for the week. These guys have been such a huge part of the Buccaneers offense in the absence of Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. As we know, Chris Godwin out for the year. They go on a bye this week. Mike Evans may be back in week 12, but if he's not, continue to roll these guys out. Jalen McMillan, amongst the notable Bucs wide receivers after all those injuries, 0 catches yesterday, game in which he was active for.
Yeah. Stephania, let's keep that running back train
Yeah,
rolling.
Let's keep the running back train going. And I will give a shout out to Austin Eckler, who had a nice performance with Brian Robinson obviously being out with a hamstring injury. 13 carries for 44 yards, found the end zone not once but twice. Now, he did only have 1 catch. Still surprising because when you think of Austin Eckler, you think you're going to see more receptions, but still primarily a ground game for him. And he did lose some touches to McNichols and Chris Rodriguez, who was activated from the practice squad. But if Brian Robinson is out, Austin Eckler clearly gets the lion's share. So keep your eye on the status coming into next week.
And I want to give a shout out to James Conner, who
baby.
crushed it
Oh,
this
what a
week. 12 carries, 33 yards, and a touchdown, plus 5 receptions for 80 yards, good enough for 22.3 fantasy points. His first game over 20 fantasy points this season.
Wow.
But you may be saying, well, that doesn't seem like a great ceiling. I'll tell you what, though, he's got a great floor. Only 2 games this season with fewer than 14 fantasy points. He has had an unbelievable floor for fantasy managers, multiple catches in 7 of 10 games this year, and he's getting the volume. 17 or more touches, 17 or more in 8 of his 10 games this year. Shout out to James Conner for carrying the workload.
So solid. Is he the best value running back?
Ooh,
J.K.
Joe
Dobbins and Joe
Yeah.
Mixon, a couple
That's
others.
cool. He's in the
Some good ones,
conversation.
He's in
Not
that
own trades.
because he was so low. I can't wait till the end of the season to
Tail end
see who
RB2
some of
for
the-
sure. He has outperformed that.
diamonds in
Awesome.
the rough were.
Let's talk about some wide receivers here that we got some excitement on.
If you have George Pickens on your fantasy roster, go ahead and find Russell Wilson's address. Probably can find that on Zillow and send him a fruit basket because Russ has uncorked George Pickens. Another monster game for Pickens yesterday. 7 targets. You like that number. 5 catches for 91 yards and a ridiculous touchdown.
Beautiful.
Catch.
Ridiculous.
Good throw, better catch. My goodness gracious, what a day it was for that Pittsburgh team who finds a way to grind out another win. Mike Williams, shout out to you for saving the day. Your 1 catch, over 10 fantasy points, 1 catch for 1 touchdown on 34 yards. But George Pickens, the star of the show right now, he is a top 20 wide receiver with Russell Wilson now under center.
Mike Williams, one man's trash is another man's treasure. I'll tell
Oh
you.
boy, is it ever.
Oh, I'm telling you. Speaking of treasure, how about Ricky Pearsall for the 49ers?
Heck yeah, I love this story.
I don't know. He was shot on August 31st through the chest, and yesterday he scores his first touchdown for the 49ers. If you saw, they were saving that game ball for him. How special is that? First career touchdown in the NFL, 6 targets, 4 catches for 73 yards. Gets you 17.3 fantasy points if you thought to put him in your flex spot. I think that he's going to be, he's flex contention week in and week out. for the 49ers.
With how much Brock Purdy is throwing the football in this offense, it feels like he's at least worked his way into the conversation there. I want to give a quick shout out to Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who helped absolutely nobody this week. I'll tell you what, career high 25.9 fantasy points. He had more fantasy points in week 10 than in his previous 15 games combined.
It's insane.
I'm surprised it's only the last
Unbelievable.
15 games.
He is the ultimate dart
Fantasy
throw.
zombie.
There is no rhyme or reason as to when you should be starting him, but it's possible we're going to have another solar eclipse before we have a game like this from Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So shout out to you for being able to be the man in this Saints offense. I thought it was going to be Taysom Hill, and it wasn't Taysom Hill.
Yeah.
It was more MVS.
Well, the hilarious part, I'm not hilarious to those who have Taysom Hill, is Taysom Hill had a 90-yard touchdown catch early in the game that was waved off because of a penalty.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been the most hilarious 90-yard touchdown catch in the history of the NFL.
Of course it would have. It would have been great for my DFS lineup, but no. All right. When we come back, we're diving into the Week 10 duds. We will see you guys in just a moment. All right, let's dive into some guys that unfortunately did not do so well this week. Field, we'd kind of talked about it a little bit when we mentioned TJ Hawkinson at the beginning.
Yeah.
Justin Jefferson, unfortunately, 9 targets, 5 catches for 48 yards, 9.8 fantasy points. Sometimes you're a superstar and you just have games like this. Does this change anything for you
Not
with
a
Justin
thing.
Jefferson?
We can move on. This is his first game in 9 outings so far this season with under 10 fantasy points, and he really missed it. He only had 9.8. So as a matter of fact, this is his first game under 15 fantasy points this season. He's been remarkable. He is that dude. Moving on, things happen. And I would argue, Daniel, the same thing applies to Baker Mayfield, truthfully.
I would agree. Yeah, it's just a tough game. Only his second game under 18 fantasy points, which again showcases the unbelievable floor that he has had for you at the quarterback position. This game is not going to impact my viewing of Baker Mayfield. He's still a top 10 to 12 quarterback for me in those 10 to 12 team leagues.
By the way, I mean, he played so tough. If you want, like, again, just it is a treat to watch Baker Mayfield play football. And I know he was playing against my 49ers, but he had a stiff arm on Nick Bosa,
Oh, my
who had
gosh.
him by one
Unbelievable.
arm for yards. Like, most people are just crumbling as Nick Bosa is trying to take him down. He couldn't take him down, and Baker Mayfield still completes the pass off that. Unbelievable. Had spin moves away from the defense. Like, Baker Mayfield is still that scrappy quarterback who I believe is going to deliver again. This was just an aberration. I was glad it happened yesterday.
What's a better stiff arm in the NFL? Derrick Henry on his way to an 85-yard touchdown, or
Derrick Henry.
really even stiff arming a guy while one of the best pass rushers in the league and then making a pass at the same time?
That was an impressive play, especially factoring in Baker's stature.
Right.
But Derrick Henry, like, throwing Josh Norman out the club,
That's fair. Okay, all
still
right.
going to, like, take the cake there. Yeah.
I do have a real quick question, Stephania. Baker Mayfield has been without Mike Evans. We've been waiting to see when he could potentially return to this offense. He needs another pass catcher because right now he's been utilizing these running backs more than ever out of the backfield. Is there a chance that we'd have an update on Mike Evans?
Yeah, Mike Evans has said that he hopes that he will return after their bye
12,
week.
yeah.
So
12 bye.
week 12 is
Okay.
what they're eyeing right now. So, you won't hear much this week because it's always quiet during a bye week. But I think the fact that the player gave us that ahead of time is a good sign.
All right, we're going to hope there's no setbacks there because we would love to have Mike Evans back in our fantasy lineups. Baker would love it too. How about another couple of duds? Barely any fantasy points. Shout out to our producer Tyler with coming up with these puns. I mean, honestly, this one was a tough one. Field, where do you want to start with the Chicago
Yeah,
Bears?
so let's start here. The Bears are broken. The Bears are completely a mess right now, and it sucks because we thought coming into the season that Caleb Williams had one of the most enviable situations for any number 1 pick ever. It turns out the answer is no, because what's instead happened is that there is not a single Bears pass catcher that has fantasy startability without any hesitation right now. You can't tell me right now that you are starting any of DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, or Rome Odunze and feeling great about it at the moment. They are a complete disaster offense. 16 of 30 for 120 yards. Patriots had 9 sacks yesterday. They came into that game with 15 for the season. The Bears made a Patriots defense look heroic yesterday. The Patriots defense is fine. It is not good. It is fine. This is what the Bears are doing right now. They are making average defenses look unbelievable. The Bears are completely broken. DeAndre Swift is the most startable of any Bear because of the fact that if I told you he's getting 17 opportunities yesterday, you'd probably tell me, like, I'm going to trot him out there. It's running back. It's still really hard to find these players. But every other wide receiver, Cole Kmet, a ghost for much of yesterday as well, and Caleb Williams has really regressed, guys. I think this is a much more important conversation, like the context of real football. But this team has no startable pass catcher right now, and DeAndre Swift is the only guy that I would go into a week and say, I feel pretty good about him in my lineup. Only guy.
I co-sign with basically everything that you said. I'm going to put a few numbers around a few of these
Please
players.
do,
You
yeah.
just mentioned them. But DeAndre Swift, you mentioned the 17 touches. He has at least 17 touches in 7 of his 9 games. That's the volume that makes you feel confident.
You need that. I mean, that's hard to beat, right?
Right. I mean, you're not getting not very many running backs in the NFL. You can feel confident in getting that consistent kind of a workload.
Totally, yep.
Caleb Williams did have a really nice 2-game stretch. 23.6 fantasy points, 28.6 fantasy points. Do you know who those 2 games were against?
Bad teams.
The Carolina Panthers and the Jacksonville Jaguars.
The problem is that these past couple of games have been opportunities for him to get right. I mean, the Cardinals looks like a tougher win, obviously, a tougher loss, I should say, a tougher team in general. I really believe this, and again, this is a fantasy football show. I'm not talking about the fantasy impact here for a second. I think the Bears just fell up. They were a house of cards that broke on that Hail Mary.
Yeah.
Think about how different their season is. If they win that game, they're 5-2. They go to Arizona, probably feeling pretty darn good about themselves, right? Instead, they've lost now 3 straight games, including to the Patriots yesterday, who are 2-7 going into that game. So
Caleb Williams in those 3 straight games under 10 fantasy points, which is not what you're looking for from the number 1 overall pick. Stephania, if I read the numbers, 6 fantasy points, 5.4 fantasy points, 7.3 fantasy points, and 5.7. So 7.3 is the highest outing in 4 straight weeks. Would you feel like that's a wide receiver that you could start in fantasy football?
I would not.
That's why it feels like DJ Moore looks like name value only to me right now because you have no confidence in starting him. I understand that he is still DJ freaking Moore, and all it takes is a couple
does
of
that mean
plays.
right now?
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't been for.
Hasn't felt like it.
yeah, vibes are low right now in Chicago. Don't play any of those guys. So that felt like a dud yesterday that, like, we need to sort of talk through a little bit more because there is some legitimate, actionable fantasy advice with it. I'm not so sure DeAndre Hopkins' day yesterday, Daniel, means that much to me.
No, tough Broncos secondary, and in spite of that, 4 receptions for 56 yards, 9.6 fantasy points. Listen, I still think, to me, he's going to be the number 2 pass catcher in this offense. I know he had as many targets as Xavier Worthy did, but he's a much better and more consistent wide receiver than Xavier Worthy is going to be.
He got Surtained yesterday.
He did, and we knew that. We had lowered expectations coming into the week because of Mike Clay's shadow report, Stephania, so we knew to lower the thought process on DeAndre Hopkins here in Week 10.
Yeah, or lower the expectations.
Lower the expectations.
Thought process still the same, but he finished just behind Justin Jefferson, and I believe we just called that an aberration on the week. So
Yeah.
I feel the same about DeAndre Hopkins. No need to dwell on that.
Can we dwell on really quickly a guy that I am a little bit more nervous for the rest of the season? Because some of these guys we haven't been as nervous about. Right? Justin Jefferson, we're still
you're
not
fine
worried
there,
about it.
yep.
DeAndre Hopkins, we still feel like we're going to go. DeAndre Swift, we feel the same way. The Broncos' backfield. We watched Javonte Williams.
Changing of the guard.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's one of the words that I wrote was changing of the guard official.
Oh my gosh.
Question mark?
I also wrote changing of the guard on my note. Are you guys serious?
Yeah,
Really?
crazy, huh?
Javonte Williams lost snaps to Audric Estime, 25 for Estime, 16 for Williams. Javonte Williams, only 2 games, over 11.5 fantasy points this year. Now, when you mention Field, I just want to ask you this. When you say changing of the guard, do you think this is a situation where you're going to see just a swap in roles and he's still going to be involved in this offense, but he's just not nearly going to be he won't be the RB1 anymore? Is this Audric Estime's show moving forward?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, Sean Payton's been telling us this, by the way, too, for a few weeks now. So no surprise here that Sean Payton ends up giving the ball 14 times to Audric Estime. And when you run capably, not amazing, but 14 carries for 53 yards, then I do expect that will continue to grow and grow and grow. The big hesitation here, or the big concern would be that actually what ends up happening is there's 3 guys playing enough, and each of them having a very specific role, that there's 0 fantasy starting assets here because Javonte is going to have a little bit of work in the passing game. He had 2 yesterday, two catches yesterday. Jaleel McLaughlin's still going to get some opportunities as well, including in the passing game.
Yep.
And then I think Audric Estime, who is a power runner who is not going to catch a bunch of passes, might be sort of tethered to I have to score a touchdown to be fantasy relevant. So this looks like it could be a fantasy wasteland in this Broncos backfield.
Yeah. Doesn't feel good.
Yep.
Doesn't feel good.
I don't want to start really any of these running backs. Cortland Sutton and Bo Nix are the only 2 that I really have confidence in this Broncos
Bo was
offense.
sharp again yesterday, up over, I think.
Duds are depressing.
They are.
I'm ready to move on.
Well, should we just rip
Let's
through a
just
couple
talk-
that
yeah.
don't really matter that much? Like
I know.
Saquon was a dud yesterday, but we
Right,
already
but-
told you earlier, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, and Saquon is the most humble guy and was probably like, "Oh, Jalen, you take
Go ahead,
it.
Jalen. You can have
Take
this
it,"
touchdown.
right?
No
He's
big
probably
deal.
sharing, so
We-
he can't be. But
do have to hit two other
we're stuck with two other offenses that neither of which I really want to discuss. But let's talk about the Jets' offense. And shout out again to Tyler, our producer, fantasy no fly zone.
Oh.
It's so true. I mean, what an abysmal performance across the board. I mean, Aaron Rodgers looked old and tired. 22 of 35 for 151 yards, had a fumble. They look
4 fantasy points for Aaron Rodgers.
4.04, by the way. They look listless and uninspired. Him and Devontae Adams, the relationship that's supposed to be so in sync, not quite. I mean, 13 targets, but only 6 catches, chit-chatting with each other when they come to the sideline. It doesn't feel good.
No.
And
Garrett
even the
Wilson,
run game,
the
yeah.
same thing. Garrett Wilson, only 6 targets, 5 catches for 41 yards. Breece Hall was the guy that had the most fantasy points in this one, 12.3 fantasy points, and luckily he got 7 of those in the passing game. So, but he has not been running the ball super great. Field,
Mess.
when you talk about this, like we mentioned Malik Neighbors earlier on in the show, right? He's kind of fallen back
He is
into
who we
a
thought he was.
wide receiver 15, maybe wide receiver 20. Are you going to change your perspective on these Jets wide receivers, or because it's Aaron Rodgers under center and it's still his best friend with Devontae Adams and he's still got 13 targets, are we still going to be ranking these guys inside the top 12 to 15 at the wide
I'm going to
receiver?
cop out a little bit, and I'm going to use something that Mike talked about last week when it comes to the Jets wide receivers. He was talking about it in the construct of Christian McCaffrey. It doesn't matter whether we rank him RB1 or RB20. Are you starting Christian McCaffrey or are you not, right? And I think that the Jets, especially Garrett Wilson, remain starting options at wide receiver. I do, because if I told you sight unseen, 13 targets for Devontae Adams, you'd probably sign up for that every single week. You probably just would. It sucks. I hate it. I was texting with one of my best friends who's a Jets fan during the game yesterday. I was telling you about this, Daniel. And I'm just like, he's like, why do I do? By the way, he's married to a lifelong Lions fan.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
You've
and like
mentioned
I mentioned
this
before, yeah, Jay, I'm sorry to keep bringing you up, bud, but like,
it's great.
he's just texting me. He's like, can I return my kids' jerseys that I bought them? Hopefully his kids don't listen to this. Sorry. Like, can I return these things? Like, what do I do? Like, this team just, it causes me so much more frustration than it does joy. And for fantasy, that's kind of how it goes. So yes, Daniel, my snap judgment as I get into my ranks later on today is Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson. Clearly Garrett Wilson, but Devontae Adams will both likely crack my top 20 at worst. But yeah, I hear you, man. Like, I hear you. The numbers bear out that you're going to rank them top 20, but it's coin flippy as to whether Devontae pays off that top 20 value.
I feel like there are going to be so many fantasy managers, at least this week, thinking, can I capture lightning in a bottle with someone that maybe isn't as good as these two guys, but I just have more confidence in? Because these two are still superstar wide receivers. Like, I don't think Devontae Adams isn't good.
Do it again.
Don't feel.
Is Alan Lazard coming back?
You know what?
rally
That's
the
what we
troops?
need.
Like, that's what we need. A little more Alan Lazard, because then maybe they might get the life back. By the way, their schedule coming up.
Give it to me.
They play the Colts this week.
Okay.
That should
Yep.
be okay. Then they have a bye. Maybe they
need
can
that.
all gather together, you know,
Kumbaya.
A little ayahuasca
and
retreat.
work on the, you know, rapport, relationship, get all that, come back a little bit revitalized.
Yeah.
Then they have Seattle at home, so the West Coast team has to travel.
Yep,
Like that.
yep.
Then they go to Miami, to Jacksonville. They play the Rams, and they're at Buffalo, and then they host Miami. I mean, it's not the worst schedule.
I mean, I thought this was the reason why Aaron Rodgers faced the darkness in the offseason, so that he would know how to be able to handle these situations. So
I just don't even know. I just, you know, we've been down this path before. It just sucks. It's not fun to talk about at all whatsoever.
all right.
I just hope that they can do something a little more inspired, because, Daniel, you have to have sympathy for Jets fans as a Lions fan who once had to live through those dark
Been
times.
there.
Yeah.
I've been there. I feel bad. Our buddy Scott, who works out here on the show, he's a Jets fan, and he was like, I think I'm done with him. And I'm like, dude,
No, you're not. You
there is
can't quit them.
there is always room in the
can't.
den. I'm just going to keep saying it over and over and over again. There's always room in the den.
Quit your team.
You are allowed to not be a Jets fan if you don't want to be a Jets fan right now. I say that just
Are
as
you
much
allowed to be a
Greeny.
Cowboys fan?
You know what? This is tough.
This one sucks.
This one doesn't feel good either, because
Feels
CeeDee
terrible.
Lamb is still unbelievable as a wide receiver, but they have lost 4 straight games.
Lower the curtains.
I saw that. I saw that.
Hey, that one catch might have turned the fortunes of his day around a little bit, right?
Little
For
bit.
those that don't know what we're talking about, once again, the roof was open. Once
Sun
again,
was
the sun was
blinding.
blinding to the point that
You can see it when you're watching on TV.
Yes.
It's not like just the player saying it. You're like, he's blaming it. You can see the glare go right across his face as he's looking back and has no clue. CeeDee Lamb's in the end zone.
He's running across the back
Wide
of the
open.
end zone, and Cooper Rush throws a football that is catchable, and CeeDee Lamb just doesn't see it because he's
Not at all.
staring into the sun. I'm not blaming him, but yeah, we should talk about the fantasy value of CeeDee Lamb because Todd Archer tweeted this yesterday. He does a great job covering the Cowboys for us, that yesterday was the fewest passing yards by the Cowboys in a game since 2001. Seems bad. That's almost 25 years ago. Cooper Rush did not look anything like the Cooper Rush that we saw back in 2022 when he filled in for Dak Prescott. This team looks completely dysfunctional on offense. Sounds like there's some sniping going on in the media after the game from players. I mean, it's just a disaster situation. Now America gets to watch them on Monday Night Football next week. Congratulations to all of us. That'll be a great way to wrap up week number 11.
Go to bed early is what you're saying.
So on the positive, the CeeDee Lamb did have 10 targets, right? He's still going to be very, very heavily targeted. We just thought that, so what we had sort of settled on going into this week was CeeDee Lamb does not have as likely of a chance to go 12 catches for 115 yards and a touchdown with Cooper Rush. But based off of their history together, still enough volume and enough efficiency that he can still get you 8 catches for 75 yards and finishes a top 15 wide receiver. If he finds the end zone, maybe even closer to top 6 or 7. Now, the offense yesterday did not look like one capable of doing that very often. His yards per catch was way down, so he's still obviously going to be started in all leagues next week, but CeeDee Lamb might check in my week 11 rankings as more like wide receiver 9 as opposed to wide receiver 3.
Field, you said his yards per catch was way down. He averaged 2.3 yards per target.
That's like bad running back efficiency.
That's off. That is obnoxiously low. And I don't know, and I don't want to be mean, but Cooper Rush looked just
But they have no other option. Trey Lance
looked just as bad. I mean, this does not feel like an offense that is going to get better.
Be
anytime
resurrected.
soon.
I mean, that's the question. Dak Prescott, we expect, is going to undergo hamstring surgery to repair his partially avulsed hamstring tendon. We should learn more about that this week. That'll mean the end of his season. And so there is, the cavalry is not coming. So they better figure out how to get this in
I'm going to say this, and I might get in trouble for it. But as a Lions fan, I felt like I watched my team mire in mediocrity for year after year after year because ownership never felt like they put the right people in charge of a franchise to be able to do things. I feel like we're at a spot right now where Dallas Cowboys fans probably feel the same way that I do. Please, Jerry Jones, let somebody else take control of this team.
That ain't going to happen.
Oh,
I know it's not.
I know, yeah.
I feel bad for Cowboys fans from that
the
respect.
argument about the curtains, if you could see that, that things are not changing. By the
They were
way,
like
I
$1.8
cannot let
billion
that go.
curtains
I
for
can't
us.
let that go. I do have to hand out a compliment to a tweet. I think it's Serenity Now 2000. It said, we need to add a stat line. Yards lost due to lack of curtains.
That's it. Yes. Oh, it doesn't feel good.
Can we end on a couple nice notes?
Serenity
Can I just tell you a couple nice things that happened this week that
Yes,
I want
please.
to mention?
Let's do that real quick.
Okay, real quick. Jake Moody, first kicker in the Super Bowl area to hit a game winner in overtime after 3 missed field goals in regulation. So, if you want to talk about turning around a bad day, turning the frown upside down, happy for him. John Mechie scores his first NFL touchdown. John Mechie, Houston Texans wide receiver who overcame leukemia. It was really nice to see him get that. And then Cameron Bynum gets a shout out for me for doing the ray gun breakdancer impression on the field.
That was good.
Yesterday. If you haven't seen it, go back and look. It will make you laugh.
Cam Bynum, the Viking safety, is probably emerging as one of the better celebrators in all the NFL. So shout out, great ray gun homage being paid right there. And the Vikings.
It's always nice to find a couple fun things.
Let me ask you guys this question. It felt like the Vikings were trying to give that game away.
Oh, my God,
They
were they
just-
ever.
They couldn't. I mean,
Sometimes it's so good for
12-7 final, yeah.
It's boring when you're good and rolling all the time.
That's true. That's true. Monday Night Football. We have been wondering whether or not Tyreek Hill was going to be good to go. Stephania, I realize we're going to wait until a little bit later on to be able to have an official update. Has there been anything since we did fantasy football now that fantasy managers can know heading into Monday Night Football?
Not that I've seen. I think it remains a game time decision. I mean, we might hear more a little bit earlier as the afternoon rolls on. It's still early in the West Coast. Of course, they're playing in Los Angeles at the Rams. We liked the vibes that Tyreek Hill was putting out, and certainly upbeat, but it remains a question whether his wrist will allow him to.
I had to bench Nico Collins in 2 different leagues. Luckily, in one of them, I had Jalen Waddle as a replacement. So I'm in good spots there. Hopefully, though, I am in a good spot because I need to see the one thing that I am really watching more than anything else. We've already seen Devon Achane be awesome, right, with Tua back under center. I need to see eventually, is this going to get this passing game, get back to the thing that we thought that it was going to be with both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle now that Tua is back as the quarterback. Anything that you guys specifically are watching for, either from the Rams or the Dolphins, before we close this thing up?
A good way of covering it right there. It's all about Tyreek Hill tonight, baby. Because
Right.
we don't just need him to play. We need him to play like Tyreek, capital T, capital H, Tyreek Hill.
What's going to happen if we get Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, full game from each?
baby.
Would love it.
Interesting.
No punches, Puka.
Yeah,
right.
yeah, I know. He seems like the nicest guy in the world, too.
nicest
Like
guy
the most unlikely to get ejected
Literally.
for a punch.
I felt like that was more like just slapping after a penalty. After the play was done, like I didn't look like a real punch. To me.
Yeah,
What are you going to do?
we'll see. But if need,
You're a 49ers fan. Of course you
Right.
have these
Yeah.
negative feelings.
Oh,
I
we
thought you
had,
should
we
go
had
to
our
jail.
own extracurriculars going on the sideline yesterday. And by the way, how about Miami? Can you do an NFC West girl favor and take care of the Rams?
Help take care of the Rams.
No.
Yeah. Who you guys taking in this one, Rams or Dolphins?
Rams. Sorry, Stephania.
That's all right. I think I took the Rams.
I think I'm taking the Rams as well.
I don't remember who I picked.
When they got both their wide receivers there, it was going to be fantastic. So I'm all in on that. All right.
Hard to bet against them.
Have fun watching Monday Night Football. We love you guys.
Veterans
Today's
Day,
show was
everybody.
presented by Boost Mobile.
Voting Dad.
Thank you to all of our veterans.
Happy Veterans Day to everybody, to those who are currently serving or have served, or the family members of those people. Don't forget to love each other. Be kind to yourself. Enjoy Monday Night Football. We'll see you guys on Waiver Wire Tuesday.